Welcome, John. We are live now.
Oh, cool. Do you want to introduce, or you're muting yourself now? All right, I'll introduce then. All right, welcome everyone. This is the Jordan B. Peterson Community Discussion Group. Today we're going to be going over the biblical or psychological significance of the biblical stories lecture 13. Since we'd finished Maps of Meaning last week, so far we just have one lecture that we watch and then discuss during the weekend. And so now we're going to be going over kind of our main points that we've gotten from watching this lecture. And if you would like to join us at all during the conversations that we have, you're welcome to. Just to go to jordanbpeterson.community, and that has all of the links for basically the discussion forums, the hangouts, the calendar for when we do these things. And yep, so if you want to ever join us at all, and then maybe eventually participate in these podcast sessions as well, then that's how you do it. All right. So Sumit, do you want to share your main points from this lecture?
Okay, so um, I was talking to one of our group members yesterday, and something interesting came up. So I was talking about how most of his ideas are getting repetitive. Like by the time you get to the lecture number 13, or
Oh yeah.
if you watch any of his interviews, then it's similar stuff over and over again. So it was getting repetitive for her also, and then we got into the discussion of how a lot of people are now treating him like a celebrity, oh, I'm meeting him this summer, this is so cool, should I buy a gift for him or something. And and some people listen to him all the time and stuff. And the point this contributor was making was that that's not the right way to treat Peterson. Like uh, that's uh, that's very similar to how many people treat, for example, God in my country. That they would, worship it. They would go to the temple, and they would do all these things, uh, right? But they actually don't know what the God stands for, and um, how to bring that in your life and in your conduct, right? So, and the point this person was making was that it's not about like listening to Peterson all the time. Now that we know most of his like ideas around how to live your life is, so it's about uh, living those values. uh, so that's also, that was very interesting point, because the more popular he gets, the more he will get treated like some kind of celebrity. And right, uh, so I'm like focusing myself more on how to live the way that he's describing.
Yeah, that bringing that up is quite interesting. Just because this last week, I've been really thinking a lot about the father archetype within that we kind of hold different people in those places, and a lot of people will, myself included, will kind of place Jordan Peterson in that fatherly archetype. And I was thinking about how there's kind of this conflict between, well, it's not okay, there's a way to view the archetype, and there's you you can like kind of have the father figure that you hold in your head as the tyrannical father, as the evil father, and it's somebody that needs to be run away from, or to be killed. From Freud's kind of understanding of the Oedipus myth was that that was kind of the unconscious desire of every man, was to kill the father and overcome basically the mother, or to fall prey to the mother. and via the archetypes. And I see how there's a bit of truth to that, but there's all, especially if the father archetype that is kind of the first instance of a father is one that is a tyrannical father. That spurs on that immense desire to reject the father archetype. So if say you were raised from in an abusive household, you're going to be wanting to run away from that father, and you'll kind of reject all other types of father figures within you. But there's another aspect that can occur from that instance where you can have a kind of naive look to anything that's the father as kind of an all good father. And this isn't like you can have that blind naivete towards everything that they do is something that is to be imitated. And I think what Jung was trying to get at through his work was you needed to have the balanced understanding that the archetype is kind of multifaceted between being both good and not good, all within the same figure. And otherwise you'll have kind of a blind obedience towards the fatherly archetype, or a blind rejection of the fatherly archetype. There's an interesting side note, I suppose, from Jonathan Haidt. He has this lecture called The Rationalist's Delusion, and he goes through kind of the more aggressive use or the aggressive wording usages between the books of the New Atheists, and how there's a lot more emotional kind of, not baggage, but emotional language that's being used within certain authors in their kind of reference to God. And it was interesting to see how the relation between those authors and other certain like right-wing conservative and their usage of emotional language. And there's this, I don't know, I think it's overanalyzing by William Lane Craig, was the assumption that the reason people are atheists is because they've had a bad relationship with their actual father, and then they project that outwards to kind of a ethereal fatherly archetype. And I don't know how accurate that is, but I think it is useful in understanding kind of the psyche of people and how you view certain archetypes, especially I think the father archetype. And this is an archetype that's not just overlaid to God. It's basically to any person that you see as respectable. So there's kind of the idea that you might put them in an all good category or in an all bad category, when there's, I think you have to understand the flaws and the useful or the flaws and the beauty within the same figure, and then you get a more complex understanding of these people for who they actually are.
But isn't that necessary to have that reaction, John? Like if your father is tyrannical,
Oh yeah.
then then having that reaction would mean that you will be plotting as to how to get out of here and be on your own.
Yeah. The child rearing is such an important stage of childhood, because if you are, say, that tyrannical father, that's going to embed itself within the the consciousness of the child to the point where they are going to bring that tyrannical father that's basically in their head, that image of what a father is, and kind of overlay it outwards into anything else that is similar to that aspect. So Peterson talks about how the feminists have a one-sided viewpoint of the patriarchy, in that it's this tyrannical person telling you everything that you have to do as kind of this authoritarian figure. But there's the beneficial father as well, which is the archetype, or the aspect of the archetype that is giving you good advice for how to manifest your fullest potential, and to turn yourself into something that you want to become. And it's you have to, even when you do have that tyrannical father, you, in order to be fully psychologically healthy, you have to come to the understanding of who they were, so you can empathize with them to the point of trying to understand why they were the way they were, and how they're not entirely evil. Like, you could say Hitler was the most evil man that ever lived, but there's still aspects of him that are human and not completely evil. There's the divide between every single person, between their evil nature and their good nature, and you'll have a ideologically blinded perspective of the world if you pin things down to one aspect of either. So you could say the mother archetype is all good, the all benevolent Mother Earth that we must protect and worship. But there's also the aspect of Mother Nature that is dangerous, that you have to be careful of, and you have to contain in certain cases, such as there's predators that will eat off all of the passive animals, and so you have to ride that fine line of order between the chaotic nature of nature. But yeah, in order to be psychologically healthy, you have to contain both aspects of the archetypes within your own images of them. And I see that there's a problem, or I don't know, there's a potential problem in how people might retreat to the God image instead of having to deal with the fatherly image, or the fatherly physical person that raised them. There might be that instance where you'll kind of retreat into the all benevolent father figure, and to the point where you're not able to question him. I think that's what Jung was getting at through his book, An Answer to Job, in showing that the father figure of God is not necessarily an all good father figure. It's a well-rounded figure that is both punishing and rewarding. That's some of the things that have been going on in the back of my head this week. So.
Okay, so I want to draw a little bit of distinctions. I think you're making important points. One would be your personal experience, and another one would be how that personal experience then later on would shape how you behave in the world. Especially, we were discussing here about the political aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So personally, so I'm making the distinction so that we can discuss them in two separate buckets.
Okay.
Because yes, publicly you would say we need to understand that complex aspect, and we need to have balance and all that. But personally, I think it works like this. Let's just say you have a relationship with someone, and the other person is behaving in a tyrannical manner, right? So I would say, with the when they do it, like, if they are like tyrannical some of the time, then that is like almost cute. I mean, you might actually like that.
Hmm.
But if the more the percentage of the times they are behaving in that manner, then you begin to get some kind of alarm that, oh, what's going on. Then eventually it would get to a point where it would, and different people could have different tolerance for that kind of thing. uh, and it, I guess, also depends upon how developed you are as an individual also. So at some point there would be some kind of alarm, and then you would react so that the other person can kind of uh, face some resistance when they are being tyrannical, and they can say, okay, this is not going to work out, and then they can modify their behavior accordingly.
Hmm.
Now, so far we do have balance. I think the person understands that it's value to have that relationship with you continue, and they are just having a disagreement about how much of their life you should be able to control, right?
Hmm.
And now, then if the other person doesn't, and I believe different rules apply in public and personal thing. So in the personal thing, I would say that there is no way around it. If the other person doesn't listen, then uh, even if that person is has some good aspects, right, and even if that person is bringing some value, uh, if they are not willing to work with you on that thing, so then it becomes a matter of them controlling your life. And to me, that just doesn't go well at all. Even if you understand the
Hmm.
complexity of it and how the other person is valuable, now you might still choose to live with that. Maybe you have kids, and you're like, okay, I'll just have to put up with this shit, man. Right? But there will never be a point of peace. I mean, obviously, you can have good interactions with that person, but what I'm trying to say is, whenever that tyrannical thing comes up, and it will continue to come up because they will begin to like control more and more of your life, and then there is no solution to that if the other person doesn't listen, except for the other person to say, like, okay, this has gone too far, and then they would have the completely black and white aspect of the whole situation, and then they would want to kind of end the whole relationship. So to me, over there, it seems to be, how do I say this, kind of working out exactly the way it is supposed to.
Gotcha. Okay, so you could be in a relationship where you have the understanding that this person is more complex. There's a good nature within them and an evil nature within them, but that still doesn't change the fact that their evil nature, their tyrannical nature, is harming you and is affecting you. Uh, I suppose a good way of trying to combat that is not necessarily through uh, taking on that same tyrannical nature against them, but to, I really think that in order to solve problems, you have to come under a shared value between you and the other person and kind of find where it is that you're able to align yourselves between, okay, you want, I'm going to make this kind of, I guess, a flippant example, but it's still a tyrannical nature example of somebody that has the house in meticulous order where everything has to be exactly clean and otherwise then things will flip out. The person will flip out and get aggressive. And so if you can, and maybe by your nature, you're a little bit more messy. You're trying to keep you're in the middle of multiple projects at a time that you have to go back and forth between. And so you're going to make a mess, and then they're going to flip out. So you can just argue with each other and have these kind of two polar opposites between personalities, and just become more aggressive with each other, and kind of have an underlying resentment that you're building between each other. But there's another way that perhaps that you can resolve the conflict between these polar opposites by coming under some sort of value that both of you hold as dear, or some value that both of you both live your lives upon. So say the tyrannical person, their overall value is to keep the house looking beautiful or in complete order, and the other person, maybe they're a bit more they have this feeling of, if everything is sterile, then that kills any creativity within them, perhaps. And so you have to see where your differences occur, and then find where both of you can agree on something. So one wants to keep the house in order, one wants to keep requires essentially a necessary amount of messiness. And so you can find, okay, we both want some sort of, we both have the overall value of a house where both of us live happily. So, because if the other person is happy, that's going to be, that means they're going to treat you with a higher respect and going to be nicer to you as they go along, and vice versa. So both people want a happy life, but both require kind of conflicting elements to become happy, one clean and one messy. And so there has to be that amount of compromise, but under the understanding of what you're doing is making you happy, and what I'm doing is making me happy, and we can find where the balance is between us. Say, I keep this area of the house in a kind of more chaotic essence than your part of the house, and you're able to spend the majority of your time outside of those places, but also able to interact with each other and kind of setting boundaries of where you're going to be going. But that doesn't necessarily, there are those instances where it's a complete tyrannical nature, where there's no exact way to combat it. But I still think that if you're attempting to combat it, you have to find where it is that they have their immense amount, where they have their highest value, and why that's leading them to the place that they are. And then once you know what their underlying value structure is, then you can use that value structure to show them how this different pattern from what they've normally been doing is a way that they can attain that higher value structure even more so than previously. And it could be that you're the one that's in the wrong, and so the way that they're attaining something is actually a much more successful method of gaining their value structure that you also want, but you're in this kind of delusional cycle where that you think that what you're doing is leading towards success, but it's constantly failing. Even every time you try it out, it's failing, and you might delude yourself even further, saying that, oh, the reason it's failing is because of some other aspect. But I mean, that's technically true, I suppose, but you have to find what parts of what you're doing is actually succeeding based upon your value structure. So if your value structure is a happy child, and you're kind of putting them through this almost robotic regime for how they're supposed to live their life, and they're not flourishing from that. They're getting bad grades. They're crying all the time. It's stuff like that. You have to balance, okay, or you have to recognize what attempts you've made have been failing, and then I don't know, change them in a way that they're now succeeding. And then they're always going to be failing in some aspect, but you can continually be updating your methodology. Anyway.
Uh, that's an interesting point. At times, I would say the contempt you have for the other person
Mm-hmm.
would perhaps not permit you to engage in that kind of thing. Uh, and For example, let's just say the other person, let's just say two people are married, and the girl wants to, is hanging out with their friends, and she's wearing a skirt, and her husband says that, hey, you can't wear that because it's about. Uh, I don't know why they say that. At least, in my country, people don't feel comfortable. No, not people. Am I saying people in general? Let me put it this way. You'll find a lot of examples like this, at least in my country, where
Yeah.
the wife is not allowed to wear certain things. And we are not talking about like wearing really short skirts or anything. I mean, uh, and they would not permit it because they would say it's about respect, and I don't know what they would say and why they do it, but I think it has something to do with the respect of the family or something like that.
I
So
guess that it's probably in part due to an insecurity within the man of fearing that if she were to be attractive out in public, then she could be. It's a dual sided, because she could be ravaged by some beastly individual, or she could be swept off her feet by some charming uh, gentleman that's of a greater value than the actual husband. That two-sided nature to that concern, I'd say.
I don't know about you, but most of like, I guess, liberal minded people would have such an extreme reaction to something like that, that like negotiation is off the table.
Oh.
Like like and you are totally demonized, like and I tend to I tend to agree with that. I mean, I think I would behave like that too, like uh, are you telling me I have to go there and understand their value structure and try to uh, and do all that? I mean, what I'm saying is, what you believe sometimes kind of makes it when you have this condescending attitude that your values are better than these other, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, what's the word they use, Neanderthals or something.
Oh.
So yeah, but I do see the point in coming to a common ground in uh, other situations, even though in this one I don't see how I could do that. uh, because what then you are going to say, I can't wear a skirt, I can wear a jeans? I mean, uh, all right, so what the problem is not about just the skirt itself, it's about whether or not you have the right as a person to wear what you want to wear or not.
Mm-hmm.
uh, so yeah, I can see that, but that in many other situations, that's an interesting point. Like, if you like order and the other person likes disorder, then maybe perhaps you should reassess your nature with the world, uh, in terms of that was a good idea, that one, you can have your part of the room or the house, where you do things your way, and in other parts they do it their way. I think that's really cool. But I have seen that whenever I run into people who kind of we are not talking about values here, just personalities, like different
Hmm.
way of living, then I say, okay, I need more balance in my life. Then like I'm always tending to work, right? So I know someone who is more like, how do I say this, spend his or her time not chasing ideas, but just living in the moment and enjoying things. And I cannot imagine enjoying sitting and enjoying a good coffee. I just don't do it. I mean, and maybe perhaps I need to kind of be more balanced about things, because to give example of order and chaos, right? So chaos is, let's say, important to creative people when they are trying to work, and but then they misunderstand that, or somehow that tends to overflow into how they place objects, right? You create a total mess in the whole house, and that's counterproductive to your own artistic these things, pursuits,
Hmm.
because when you know exactly where the things are, you can find them really fast. So that thing helps you in your work, I guess. But if you apply it to where you put the TV remotes, where you put the knives in the kitchen, and you just put them anywhere, then you are making your whole daily experience really, more difficult than it should be, right? Because I have tried this out myself. When you know where things are at all times, and they are at exactly that place all the time, you use them, you put them back at the designated place, then that actually gives you more freedom to do other things, because uh, you have increased the amount of certainty around your home to such a degree that you don't have to exhaust your brain, trying to figure out where things are, right?
Hmm.
So that can help. In the second, okay, you want to say something?
Oh, from that, oh, I used to play a lot with Lego bricks as a younger person, and I at one point went through the entire process of sorting each uh, aspect of or each type of Lego bricks all in one place and kept them into individual drawers, and that was quite different from the way that I had done it when I was younger, where all of the Legos were all intermixed within each other in this large pile. We have a ton of Legos, uh, and there's two different types of creativity that for those two different styles. If you have just kind of this large pile surrounding you, there's kind of the creative style of looking into this, trying to find something, plucking it out, and then kind of shaping from all the things that you see around you. And so that kind of requires a very chaotic nature. And that's kind of like taking the aspect, it's taking order out of the chaos. And that's a really interesting thing because you're not going to know what you're wanting to build until you see a piece and then pull it out and then add it to the thing that you have now, and now it's become something new. And then when I had everything structured and sorted and all of that, in order to build anything, I would have to have a mental image within my head already, and then I would have to go and grab each piece from all the different places and then put it together. And that's kind of take creating this kind of new thing out of the order. So it's like both of them are kind of a, if you want to look at it symbolically, a birthing process, but one out of chaos and one out of order. And it's two very different like ways of thinking of the world. But I do believe this ties into my other point that I was considering what it is that are the main conflicting, not stereotypes, but aspects between Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. And it seems to be related to introversion and extroversion. Whereas it's in most like Western myths, it's a story of uh, a hero leaving the place that they were leaving the place that they were originally, going out, finding the dragon, and killing it. And for Eastern philosophy, it's very much being in the place you are now, going inward to discover the dragons within, slaying them, and then becoming somebody new. And both of those are important stories that need to be integrated within an individual's life, between fighting the dragons within and fighting the dragons without. And it seems like both polarized opposites work better when they're used in tandem, because in order to be the best external dragon slayer, you have to already have slain all the dragons within yourself. And you could, but sometimes you're trying to go outwards to slay a dragon before you've slayed the inwards one, and you're going to ultimately fail, because that external dragon is kind of telling is using whatever flaws and weaknesses you have been running away from in order to defeat you. And I think, see, being raised with hardly any Eastern culture embedded within myself, I have no like archetypal Eastern story that I can latch onto, but it does seem to be that reaching enlightenment from within by going through hell, essentially, within your own mind, and then overcoming that. Like, okay, like in the case of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, he's put into a place where he can't escape. He can't face the dragons outside of himself. So being kind of put in that limited space, he did what he could do and kind of looked within himself to see what he did that got him into this position that he was in currently. And then because he did that, that had an outward effect upon the kind of entire society because of the creation of the book.
I had a question with you around that.
Mm-hmm.
So when he talks about how if only people didn't speak up, and they were arresting the farmers in kind of groups, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like you cannot round up. I don't know what the exact numbers were, but it was big, large group of farmers, and you can't just go in and arrest them. Like uh, you have what are you going to do? To send 10 people to arrest them, or like send an entire army? Like that's a difficult thing to figure out. So they didn't have to do that, and what the point, I don't know what point he was making, but I was certainly seeing that in the cities when they had to go to one arrest couple of families a night, then they would send in all these police officers and stuff. And he said it was totally, these people were doing all kind of procedures around that, and he was like they were totally unnecessary, because if all you had to do was send them a letter, and they would report to their security office next morning. So and because that's how they arrested the farmers, that they sent out the letters and say, okay, you are going to come here, and they came one by one, like in the lines, and all of them were sent to gulags.
Wow.
And the point he was making was, what if they had banded together with each other and attacked these guys with the weapons, just the weapons that farmers use, then they would be like, or even if they were arresting the other civilians in the city, if they protested, if they put up a big fight, then right, so that would indeed make a difference. And my question is, this is just the background. The question is that I have known that without him telling me this. Like, I have known it for a very long time that when people are trying to do bad things, you have to push back against them. And even one person pushing back, like even little bit of pushback, can can really make a lot of difference. It you are kind of sending out a message that, hey, if you want to engage in things like this, there are going to be consequences. I have always known that. And now my question is, John, how can something like this happen? I mean, uh, uh, how can you know things like that? I mean, it's not like I can prove it. uh, I just happen to think that's right, that's how it works. It's not like I got a class in this thing, and somebody told me, hey, here is how this works, here is the research. I just always known this is how it works, even before I knew that what was going on in Germany or these other places, where they say every individual had to be corrupt at some level. uh, and now it is very it's interesting that they are talking about that idea explicitly, but at some level I had always known that, even in my country, they say, oh, it's because of the corrupt system, you cannot trust the system, this and that. And that is obviously true, but you I also known that people are also full of shit. I mean, like they if they are getting corrupt system and corrupt politicians, they kind of deserve it. I could just see it. uh, and I don't know how. I mean, it is a strange thing, uh, that sometimes you just happen to know things, have these kind of uh, and it is strange, John, because I have a friend. uh, he's very intellectual, so I was talking to him, and I told him, hey, I'm trying to make a difference in other people's lives here. And he's like, what, how would you do something like that? And I told him that uh, uh, so I was kind of mentoring young people, and I was like that, I'm trying to share my experience with them, and listen to them, and see what I can do to help them. Like, it's not like I have a general theory about things. And he asked me, how do you really know you are making a difference or not? How do you know? And like, how do you measure it? What scale do you use? And I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I would never know, even if I made a difference. It's not like people would tell me. They don't always tell you. So it's just something that you keep trying to help. You keep pushing, like the Trump says. You keep punching, 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 and eventually you win. So, and I told him that's how this works. And he till the last point, he couldn't like understand what I was talking about, because to him it was like, hey, it's not possible for you to know whether or not you are really helping these people or not. So how can you keep trying, right? Now I could have stopped, but I do keep trying. And last night I was able to help out a friend, help him understand that he need to be more assertive about things in his relationships. And when other people are trying to tyrannize you. And eventually I sent him the uh, rule number 2: treat yourself
Mm.
like the one you are responsible for helping. And he was like, oh man, everything makes so much sense to me now. So uh, yeah, so it's a strange, I don't know, it's a strange thing, George, sorry, John. It is a strange thing that you can keep doing things without having kind of a belief, and knowing that it is right. And without having you couldn't prove it to other people ever. uh, even in the book, the Gulag Archipelago, he's writing down all his things based on his experience, but he cannot prove it. And when we listen to them, we can see that, hey, this is exactly right what he's talking about, that if you had pushed back, when the Peterson says that whenever in your organization they try to implement these crazy policies, the very first time you see them, you start reacting, like you say, hey, stop, this is not making sense. And if you could do that, these people wouldn't get that kind of momentum. And I listen to that, and I say, oh, that is exactly right, I think he's right about this. uh, right. Which is very different from other things, like distance from this thing, sun to earth or moon, and uh, right. So, or other scientific things, like you can actually prove them. And these things you don't actually know. You can just feel that this is making sense, this is right. And then the only way to really figure out for yourself, I guess in this domain, the proof is the acting of your beliefs itself. And if they don't work, that is still not necessarily a proof that they don't work. So it's a weird domain.
Yeah. I, for myself, whenever I have some sort of strategy for like how I think the world should work, I started taking up this practice of seeing how the opposite side would use that same strategy, say, against myself. So, like in the case of, say, take Jordan Peterson, how he wanted to, or he had suggested that maybe Canada's elected officials should cut funding to the more leftist universities, just to see how they're capable of surviving on their own. But you can look at that from the opposite kind of perspective, where how would it be if somebody that was more Democrat, say a Democrat was in charge. I don't know the system exactly in Canada, but a more leftist person was in charge and decided to cut funding for certain more conservative schools or more conservative events. That would be something that would cause uproar from the conservatives. And there's and you can kind of look at the attempt to censor hate speech within the U.S., where if there's no platform for bigoted people to converse their opinions and their beliefs, then that drives these people to express these problems that they're seeing. And it could be that they're within a very small position and they're kind of projecting their problems outwards and seeing it for themselves. And then if you censor them from a more open discussion, then they're going to recluse or they're going to seclude themselves within a very tight-knit community where they're able to share these heinous thoughts. And because you're having people of similar ilk or a similar mindset discussing, they're going to be feeding off of each other and exaggerating their points between each other. And this is something that occurs both on the left and the right. If you go about trying to sanction off discussion between opposites and try to come to some sort of overall a deeper understanding of the opposite side and yourself, if you try to cause that divide to occur, it's just going to become more and more extreme to the point that people aren't able to interact with each other anymore. It's basically like driving a civil war. Like, I know in the case of World War II, it kind of started out, Hitler was trying to, his platform was basically to get the socialists out of Germany because they were ruining the economy and the people. And from that, because people were like, yeah, we hate these communists that are in our country, because he got that, he went even further. And so anybody else that were, it's funny, the more you separate yourself from your enemy, you kind of tend to become more and more like them unknowingly, unconsciously. And so that's where that ability to empathize with the opposite side and to see, okay, what is the reason that they feel this way? What has led up their entire life to cause them to believe this fact to be true? Because it's usually something that they've observed. That it seems to be kind of the way that people are, is they observe a lot of problems within their ultimate their sphere around them, and they like unconsciously notice them and try to come up with some sort of solution to those problems. And you have no real idea whether or not the solution is going to work or not until you put it into practice. And so there needs to be that kind of compromise where you can attempt these solutions and figure out if they're overall beneficial or overall detrimental. But being able to come together under a shared value system seems to be the greatest way that you can do that so far. I mean, I haven't been able to implement this in practice as of yet, but I'm looking towards doing so.
I can see the examples of that, John. For example, the right of the individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that was the like shared ground, a lot of these political things would not be happening, because then we would just say it doesn't matter if he's a Republican or something else, he still has those rights. But we do see that when, for example, the Bush had this spying program, or all these um, other things that were being done in the name of national security, a lot of people were angry, and when Obama got caught, like when it turned out he was even worse than Bush, uh, when all those things leaked, so then his people started, like, there was no like enough outrage that otherwise would have been if this was someone who was Republican. And the same thing applies to the Republicans. They were defending their guy, and then when Obama got caught with all those NSA things, he kind of doubled down on those programs. Then they were they were talking about liberty and shit. So uh,
That's like what I was discussing earlier, how you'll kind of hold the father figure, so in this case the president, as to be all good instead of a mix between good and evil, and that's kind of a it's almost out of necessity, or at least it feels like it. If everyone's attacking the evil side of, say, Trump, then you're going to be holding Trump as, say, the all good, everything he's doing is good, and they're saying everything he's doing is evil. There has to be some sort of common ground that you can use to, like, Scott Adams has this, I think it's like 20-minute video where he's just talking to his live stream or something, and he's talking about opening up a a wormhole essentially between people on different political sides of the scale. And the way he does that is kind of through this exact method of pointing out, okay, can we agree that Trump tends to exaggerate on certain things? And yes, oh, okay, good. And then he kind of like works his way outward to bridge that divide between how people look at certain figures, such as Trump, or you can do it with any divide potentially. I don't know. It's a really interesting video. I'll share a link to it in the description once we in the podcast.
The interesting thing that happened, John, is that the system, kind of political system, has become so corrupt that it's about wiping the other side out. So so if Democrats are criticizing Trump, so it doesn't matter if they are telling the truth, because his people would think they don't care. It's the against shared values thing. They don't care about the truth or anything like that. They are just using the truth thing against him to take this guy out. The same thing goes for all those other scandals uh, about grabbing women and shit. So uh, uh, people have like finally realized that these people don't necessarily give a crap about that issue in itself. They are just using it to cause moral outrage and destroy this guy. So so the shared thing that was there. So we know that the other side does not genuinely believe in that. They are just using that because it is convenient for them to destroy the other side. uh, if And then it doesn't matter then for what reason you are criticizing the guy. They will just not take you seriously, because then even if they agree with you that what you are saying is factually correct, they would just say, yeah, but your main aim is to take our guy out so that you can put in your guy. So then even the truth doesn't seem to matter. uh, Instead, if we had a situation where people gave more importance to the truth or the issues we are talking about rather than the people, then uh, they would be not only going after Trump, they would be censoring, not like censoring as in not letting them speak. Just the right word would be what's the right word these days? You end up using these strong words, like going after their own people when they are in violation of the truth. For example, there was this senator, this Democrat who was in that photo where he seemed to be, grabbing the breast of some.
Mm-hmm.
He's like having this pose, and she's saying how he, like kind of abused her earlier. So I would be, I thought that hey, the kind of talk that these Democrats give, I would expect their top leaders to come out immediately and say resign, like like totally destroy that guy, even if it is on their side. uh, that's what I would expect, and that's what I myself would have done if I had that kind of if I was in their shoes. I know I would have done that. That even if it is your guy, you take him out, like uh, you go after him, and they didn't do that. People, you did not see the same outrage that you would see if it was from he was from a different party. So what I'm saying is, if we really had those shared values and everyone believed in them, then those things would become secondary, and the primary thing would be, hey, it doesn't matter who is breaking those shared values. Whoever does it, we will kind of fairly go after them. But that doesn't happen. So I do see your point. But the interesting thing about shared values is like when people start misusing them uh, to promote their political agenda, right? So then nothing matters after that. I mean, then it all becomes kind of a game where you use whatever tactics you can use to take out the other guys and put your guys inside.
Well, how would you do that if you're utilizing shared values? So if you're like taking into account what the other guy's wanting, oh, is it like by tricking the other guys, like by saying, oh, I am coming under the shared values that both sides want, say, uh, say a higher GDP or a lower, whatever, something that both parties can agree on, and then they don't go about doing those shared values. Would that be the way that
Okay.
they would?
Okay. Here is what I mean by that. This whole thing about women, right? So I think both sides agree that we need to protect women from all this sexual
Mhm.
misconduct. And you would, I doubt if you would find, I don't know, maybe you'll find few people, but most people agree that we need to stop that kind of thing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a situation like that, when you see Trump saying things about women, right? Uh, so they get outraged. They kind of lose their minds. They start calling out for him to drop out of the race, or he's not qualified, this and that. So they then appeal to our this sense all of us have, that we need to protect women. They appeal to that to take him out. All right. Now when their own guys get get caught in something like, say, a situation like that,
Mhm.
we don't see the same degree of outrage. So you are like, okay, so this shared value we have, that we need to protect women, that is perhaps now you see all these networks, this there was this guy from 60 minutes, and there were a couple of other very liberal these media people who got exposed.
Mhm.
And I couldn't believe it. Like, I was like, this is the like, if something like that was to happen to, let's just say, Fox News or something, they are already portrayed as, not so good people. But uh, on all these networks, right, which are, like, where people seem to, kind of, if you watch them, you can see that they are promoting liberal values. And
Mhm.
uh, you would be like, these would be the last places on the planet where you people would put up with this kind of shit. And it just doesn't make any sense. Then the shared value we were talking about, protecting women, we are like, yes, those values are important and we want to protect women, but they are secondary to uh, these other things that we are doing, like protecting people who are I was listening to this Rubin and bunch of other people gathered in Florida, and there was this lady who was talking about how feminist. She was part of a feminist group, and she really wanted to help women. And uh, somebody in the leadership there said that in one of the meetings that. Yes, we always want there to be some kind of tension going on, so that we are needed. Or she was talking about how the feminist protected Clinton uh, when he was doing that. And when like I was, I would say, a couple of years back, I was like, yes, you guys are exactly right. What if he was having an affair with an intern? These conservatives, they perhaps are like, what's their problem? uh, and yeah, that was the media narrative. And there were like comedians saying, Mr. President, you are working so hard, you are working at even when it's 2 a.m, so if you want a blowjob, I will give you a blowjob. So they were doing all these things. And uh, and somehow when Trump uh, uh, says things that he likes to do this or that, and then I was like, but wait a minute, like it doesn't make any sense to me. uh, uh, doesn't the same argument apply to him? And how they misrepresent what they are saying? Like he said women let him do that. uh, he said they let him, and they started talking about how he's talking about assault. How can it be assault if he said they let him? To me the whole situation was uh, I mean, uh, you can see from their conduct, John, that the shared values are just something for them to appeal to take out their political enemies. And when their own people get caught, those shared values, and today I can see it. I mean, if you are in a because I work in the private sector, and if you are having affair with an intern, and if you were and I had this discussion long time back with this manager who said, people should keep their nose out of other people's personal affairs in the workplace, who is dating whom. And I was like, yeah, man, you're exactly right. I totally agree with you, but there is a other side of it. Like if someone in the position of power is having an relationship with an intern or something like that, then or even someone else, then that I don't see how you can defend that. I mean, that just uh, that borders on somewhere between like unethical conduct to actually abuse. uh, so it's at the very least it's unethical practice. You
Hmm.
are how can you say that you can sleep with that person and not give that person extra, cut them some slack or give them extra resources than you would do other people? You just can't you just can't make any argument there. uh, right? And so it starts from that, uh, and it ends that it's end at kind of I would say sexual misconduct. uh, you know so I can see that now. And what these people try to do, they try to cut their own people some slack. So then when they try to go after other people that perhaps agree with your policies, say, hey, this guy is not good with women, and uh, he's you are like, yes, I still care about women, I want women to be safe and everything, but we have already established that we don't give a crap about that. Like you just want to take him out because of this women issue. And then you are like, if we are going to play this game, then I want my guy who can promote my policies, right? There. And we have already established that we really don't give a crap about women here. So
I,
I was talking about those kind of things.
yeah, you actually brought up a point that I was just thinking of. Okay, so they say that their highest value that they hold is to protect women and to make sure women are able to not be sexually harassed. But in the cases where a woman is being sexually harassed by somebody that they hold that is on their team, basically, that has political power, uh, then they're instead going to take the side of the person. They're going to defend the person that is their representative. Uh, and I think it's for, because I mean the same thing happens on the right too. If there's some sort of core value structure that the right has, and then the whoever the right's representative is contradicts that, they're going to still defend him, because even if people are trying to kind of show them how blind they are being right now. And I think the really
I remember when Trump said that something like somebody was criticizing Russia. Some kind of reporter was asking him question, and he said something like, "America is not uh, innocent," or like, "We have also killed a lot of people," or something like that. He said about America, like, "You're criticizing Russia, like we are not, like we have done horrible things as
oh
well."
yeah.
And the conservatives were like not at all outraged. They were laughing even, like. And I was like, if somebody else had said that. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So there are
yeah.
many examples like that. Like there are, you will not run out of examples in what you're talking about. So go ahead.
So I think what that is evidence of is there's some sort of underlying higher value structure that or higher value that the people that are defending this person have that isn't okay. So let's say our value structures are like a pyramid. So like kind of like Maslow's pyramid of values, or I don't know how it exactly is, but let's say that people hold up protect women as the top of their pyramid. Let's say feminists. Underlying that is kind of this other value structure that is maybe required in order for you to get that pyramid or that peak of the pyramid. And I'd say that underlying value structure would have to be a representative for women in a position of power. And so, in the case where, say, Bill Clinton, even though on a small scale, women are not being protected in this instance, there's the underlying necessity of having a leftist in a position of power because they represent the needs of, say, underneath that, yourself. Um, so you can have the kind of individual, let's say most people don't want to work. And so they see that if they were to, say, elect Bernie Sanders, then that would create a position where they wouldn't have to uh, basically work a 9 to 5 job anymore. Or they wouldn't have to be overly stressed about their uh, college debt and all of those things. So there's kind of this underlying, I don't want to say self-interested value system. And then above that, once you have the things that are self-interested for yourself coming in, then after that you can get a above value structure of, okay, in order to get in this underlying value structure of things that benefit me, I have to have somebody that represents me in a position of power. And then above that, you can also have, once I have somebody in a position of power, then we can care about uh, womankind, basically. And it seems like that's why people will defend their representatives. And like I was saying earlier, of holding them as the benevolent father figure or benevolent mother figure, you could say, even though in a position of power that's usually the father archetype, whether or not it's, say, Hillary Clinton, that would be her in that archetype, or say the queen, even that's a position of power. And so, yeah, a position of equality would be kind of a communistic thing, which is generally more the motherly archetype of fair spread. But in order to kind of get that position, you have to have, anyway, a position of power.
There is something else I want to, I
Uh-huh.
because there is something that is not making sense to me
Yeah.
in this archetype thing. So that certainly I think was true for Obama. Like uh, I could see them holding him in a very high esteem
Mm-hmm.
with this father archetype that you are saying. I'm not sure if a father archetype applies to him, but he was a likable guy.
Mm-hmm.
So with him, I do see this thing that a lot of things are about his personality, about his charisma and everything, and they hold him to a very high esteem. Like, hey, he's incorruptible.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there are to me, it's I'm reminded of this idea from Ayn Rand novel, where this guy called Peter Keating goes to this other guy who writes this newspaper column, and Keating says to him, "Hey, like, I feel like, man, you have totally thrown me under the bus here. Earlier, used to be very nice to me, used to promote my work, and now, I'm kind of, going bankrupt here. So, what's going on with you? What about our friendship, man? Why don't you promote me?" And
Mhm.
then this guy says to him that, "Hey, Peter, look, man, there is nothing personal here. I promoted you because in those times, that was the politics that he was trying to kind of, or the agenda he was trying to promote. And you are just an instrument of that agenda. And now times have changed. So he has come up with new policies in which he as a person doesn't fit. So what I'm trying to say is, to him, people would not matter. They were just could be replaced with someone else, like a spoke in a wheel, and he cares more about the wheel keeps going. So in case of Trump, for example, a lot of is about his personality as well. But I think that it wouldn't matter so much as like one of the right wing commentators was saying that it wouldn't matter if Darth Vader was running for president, as long as he was opposing the other side,
Mhm.
they would still vote for him. So it becomes more about, it doesn't matter if it is Bernie Sanders or someone else, as it doesn't matter if the person is, like, how do I say this, not perfect. Like, look at Bernie Sanders' hairs, right? And he's old and everything. And there is all this talk that we used to hear, at least uh, in the past, that in order for you to be the president, you need to be kind of look like this alpha male character who has a family, this and that. All those traditional things. But now what I'm saying is, you can be a totally despicable human being, uh, right? Or you could be someone who is more like meek, maybe like Bernie Sanders. As long as you hold those policies true, and you promote them and you fight for them, uh, people would just ignore everything else, uh, and just get behind you, because you are promoting their policies. To me, it somehow seems that uh, because Trump, I don't know, maybe subconsciously he is father figure to people, but I don't see how you can say that he's a nice person. I mean, he is against everything that conservatives hold dear in terms of social conduct. Uh, and uh, People, I doubt if anyone says to their kids that you need to be like Trump. Uh, uh, right. So, but he's promoting those policies. He's the one who is standing up and fighting for these people. So they would get behind him. So what I'm saying is, what you are saying is correct. That they do. A lot of people do hold their leaders in this kind of godlike positions,
Mhm.
where they are blind to it. For example, the example of opera, right? If she runs, I believe a lot of people would vote for him because she's opera, she's so cool, she has all this reputation, she's this like mother, ultimate mother-like figure. So, uh, so all those people would vote for him because of that. So there is that element always going on. Even Obama was like portrayed as we use the word messiah, and uh, even I was sitting in India and following the news, and to me it seemed like that Obama is the savior, like he's going to save the world, because that was the narrative, and uh, and he was so cool, everybody liked him. But right, there's a lot of that, but I believe these days there is more about this other thing going on, where as long as you are promoting their policies, hey, everything else is like secondary.
Yeah. Well, I don't really know where else to go from here. Uh, I realized that we haven't really discussed anything that occurred during the actual lecture, but I'm sure this was probably a useful in certain subjects. This was a useful conversation, especially on the whole topic of the deification almost of Jordan Peterson, and how people can see him, and or whoever else they hold up as their kind of uh, fatherly figure, or I don't know, somebody that they aspire to be like.
Actually, I wanted to interject there that yes, you are right. I'm glad you brought that up because that was the whole point. That I think he gets away with a lot of shit that people shouldn't get away with. I have seen it like uh, in the his. I'm so glad that we'll be discussing his book, and I'm so glad Ben will be coming there because because in rule number two,
Mm-hmm.
he writes the kind of stuff that uh, you shouldn't get away with. I mean, is he really a scientist? I mean, he. I was telling that other member that I was having discussion with that
Mm-hmm.
he's talking more and more like some kind of mystic poet or something. So he's not saying scientific things anymore. And initially, when he started, he was very careful. He never said I doubt I never in his earlier works I never saw him portray him as someone who is very open about having some kind of metaphysical beliefs.
Uh-huh.
And now he's very comfortable going on even in like Europe and saying there how he kind of firmly sees that there's a metaphysical thing going on here. And I'm not saying that there is metaphysical aspect to reality, and I'm not saying that there is not. To me, it's just that people. I remember when he was on Sam Harris podcast. I forgot the exact question, but yeah. The question was he was saying that how the figure of Christ was archetypical in the sense that that was the maximum sacrifice that could be demanded in that situation. And Sam Harris questions him on that, like, no, that's not the case. And he gives him an example about, I believe, that it could have been worse. And he just skids around that point. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, yeah, I mean, what I'm worried about this thing, John, is that this intellectual dark web
Mm-hmm.
might eventually become uh, I don't know if it will become that, but I think we need to certainly concerned about uh, these guys becoming okay. Let me explain it by an example. Earlier, liberalism used to be such a good idea, and I really liked it. By liberalism, I mean the American liberals or the progressives, right? So it used to be such a great idea, giving people rights and fighting those evil conservatives who wants to do this social censoring, and they are very intolerant of change, this and that, and all the religious stuff. And then eventually it became something else that even people who thought they were on their side were like find themselves joining the people who tend to seem more conservative, and it doesn't make any sense. So to me it certainly seems that this intellectual dark web, the more mainstream it becomes, the more corrupt it can become. And I'm not saying people call these people out. I mean, maybe I'm not looking hard enough. I mean, I think Peterson needs to be questioned a lot. uh, but the problem here is, John, there is no I mean, except for Sam Harris, uh, I don't see any credible authority, because if mainstream media criticizes him, I'll be like, I'm not wasting my time
Mm-hmm.
listening to their nonsense. Uh, so they have no credibility. So that's a serious concern that uh, his people, I don't know, even his Bible lectures, people do seem to treat him as a father figure, uh, and they do seem to have a kind of a reverence for him, and that should be something that is very concerning. I don't think anyone should have that kind of power, John.
I, I agree with you on how it's concerning for people to be placing him in this kind of position uh, of that all benevolent father archetype. I'm not sure if I agree with the point that people shouldn't have this much power, because there are instances where people will be somebody with this much power can use it for good. And overall, I still see Peterson as doing what he can in order to create more good within the world. And uh, as as you were saying, the more we listen to him, the more kind of he repeats his points, and so it may be that over time we lose that growth that we've gotten from just listening to Jordan Peterson, because he'll reuse basically the same people that we've heard from all before. And so there's going to be that point where we can stop listening to just Jordan Peterson and listen to many other different figures, or to research things on our own to see where maybe the blind spots that Peterson has. Like for myself personally, I'm disconcerted with the objection he has to Islam, and I mean I can understand it for sure, but I don't see it as a useful othering. As I said, I think there needs to be an effort to put into find what common values we have between, like, say, what common value structure there is that can be run in parallel between, say, the Bible and the Quran, or with secular values and the Quran. Because if the Quran is their highest, the thing that they hold in most high value, then that gives us a target to work towards, not to work towards, a target for us to look at and use in order to share a common value. And then once we have that common value, then we're going to be able to have a conflict that isn't going to be an outright separation between us. Like Peterson brings up the point about in hockey, you have two opposing teams, but they're playing the same game. So they have that common value of, let's play a game, but both sides want to essentially win. But they don't want to win to the point that they're never going to be allowed to win ever again. So, like, they're not going to cheat because they're going to want to play this team again in the future. So once we have that base foundation, and I think that Sam Harris has kind of nailed down a good part of that, of well-being. He kind of puts well-being as that base foundation for all of morality. And so from there, we have to find out, okay, is well-being the highest value that you hold, or it's not that exactly the highest, but it's the base foundation of your value structure. And then from there, you'll have, like, okay, well-being, and then living peacefully, and then on from there with, say, the different political figures you hold in high value, or the religion that you hold in high value, or so on from there. Anyway, I see that as one place that people could be not no, a place where people could be trying to go further than Peterson, as it's something that he's currently uh, ill-informed, or not ill-informed, currently in a position of, uh, I guess, too busy to continue on with those discussions with different Muslim uh, people, that Muslim scholars, or whatever. What was I? Uh, yeah, so that's a place where we as individuals can try to find some sort of common ground. There's this YouTube channel called the Veritasium Project, or no, it's just the Veritas Project, and there was this great discussion between a Christian and a Muslim trying to doing this exact kind of thing, finding where things they had between themselves that they could agree upon, and then that way from there you're going to be able to get more nuanced discussion between each other and trying to come to a shared conclusion that both of you can benefit from. That's the ideal.
John,
Yeah.
a Muslim with that with whom you can have that kind of conversation is not the kind of Muslim we are talking about here. I mean, uh, it doesn't even matter if you can find shared ground with that Muslim, because you already have a shared ground with that Muslim, which is that you can talk about these things without killing each other. Okay, okay, and so you already have that. Now you may find more common ground, or you may not. It doesn't really matter to me, uh, because there is already enough that is shared. um, but we are talking about the kind of people who are not even open like that. I mean, find me a country, and I have had this discussion with even my Indian colleagues, some of the people that I know, and I was so surprised that they think like this. And back then I used to be more agreeing with the progressives, American progressives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was very surprised with the answers I was getting from these people about the this community, and I have a friend who does uh, who reads a lot about this, and I had a discussion with him also. Uh, and somebody made an interesting point, which was find a country where these people are in a majority,
Mm-hmm.
and where people are still treated with the kind of standards that the West has, or where other people are uh, other different ways of living the life, and are kind of accepted, and find a country where these people are majority, and are not using their religion to conduct policy. uh, so so to me, John,
Mm-hmm.
it's not about finding common. You actually don't know the kind of extremists that are out there, and they are not just few people. There is a general kind of this mindset, like Ben Shapiro was saying, that if you do a poll in this country, somewhere between 50, 60, 70 to 80% uh, comes out with the kind of answers that are totally in opposition to everything we stand for in the West, and even in India. I mean, even in India, up until recently, they a Muslims used to have a different system for divorce. They could just it's called triple um, talaq, and their women, they don't have any kind of rights in that, because the husband can just divorce her just like that. They can message you and divorce you. There was this religious place where women were not allowed to enter, even in our country. And people have been fighting for a long time, and now there are reforms that are happening around that. And there are people in their community who are saying that these new reforms will hurt the Muslim women, this and that. And so yes, we are doing those reforms in our country. Okay, but can you find common ground with Muslims who feel they are victims of the tyrannical religion and the society they have built around it? Yes, we already have a common ground with him. But as far as these type of attitudes are concerned, where people believe Sharia law is the right thing to do, uh, I am very, very doubtful that you would be able to change their minds. They don't have the kind of minds that can be changed, John. And not enough people in the West realize it, because you are looking at this world from your perspective and the kind of
Hmm.
people you know. You have not met some of these people, uh, and even in India we have people like that, which are not just from Muslim community. Even in Hindu community, they have those kind of people. And the answer that I give to people about those people is, hey, what do you want to do about them? And I'm like, we need to oppose them at every chance we get, and we need to wait for them to die. It was this thing that helped me realize what Steve Jobs meant when he said death is such a good thing, because it recycles the old ideas, and then the new ideas come in. So frankly, a hell lot of people, uh, which are now like 50 or 60 in my country,
Hmm.
I'm just waiting for them to die, John.
As you're reading the Gulag Archipelago, I think it could be an interesting ex- uh, experiment to imagine how there could be the same situation for the people within the mindset of communism, and perhaps within the mindset of extremist uh, Islamism. Because I don't know. As I have no, you're exactly right. I have no exact interaction with any of this myself personally, so I can't speak with it on it with any authority. But I don't know. It could be that there are people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn within these communities that have to go through the introverted change before they can change the external, say, state, just like in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's case. And
I agree
so,
with you there. I agree. Uh, but my point was, perhaps you folks in the West uh, focus too much on your own way of thinking at things and ignore other things, like
mhm.
we can change their minds or they can have their internal this thing. I'm like, okay, they can, obviously people are doing that, no one is denying that. But then at the same time, to kind of ignore the reality that we do have a problem where people
Yeah.
do believe this shit and they will not change their minds. And to say that it's rather than it being a system wide issue in those kind of countries where these people are in a majority, rather than looking at it as a systematic problem, they say, oh, no, 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 you have to understand, most of them are sane people. And uh, we have only few extremists. And I'm like, no, it's, you have got the problem diagnosed in reverse, man. And as long as you have that, you are not going to have change, because these Al Qaeda, these Syrian people, Syrian, what is that thing called, ISIS, to me, they are not the real problem. Now, don't misunderstand. We need to stop them from killing all these innocent people. Okay, I'm not saying that at all. And ISIS took it to the next level, uh, which kind of makes my point hard to make. Uh, but let's just say, even before ISIS, like we were having these Al Qaeda, this and that. So how many, even ISIS fighters, ISIS, John. So how many percentage of the population they really are? No, they are very violent people who needs to be stopped. I'm not saying that. It's just that, John, you are ignoring the second part of the problem, where you have this kind of society where these kind of uh, people are allowed to exist. And in that society, if you average it out, the fundamental belief system people have are very much in very much not compatible with the West. And to me, if that gets changed, you wouldn't then that society would no longer permit these ISIS types to even uh, kind of come up. uh, so
Well,
that's the real problem. And yes, you might say that, hey, I have a friend who had told me, hey, if you were born in Afghanistan, I was like, if I was born in Afghanistan, then probably I will be having a AK-47 and I'll be murdering Western soldiers or something. uh, because that's the world I grew up in. That's what I have seen. That's I mean um, so I'm not saying that is not true, that if you grow up in an environment like that, it's not necessarily your fault uh, that you believe what you believe. But at the same time, what you believe is a big problem, John. If you believe shit like this, that, and you need to you perhaps this is the thing that you people invest think, oh, we can find shared ground with them, oh, we can find solutions, we can accommodate them. And my only point is, no, John, you can't always do that. Sometimes it's about taking the fist approach and saying, standing up and saying, hey, these are the values, these are the standards, you abide by them or not. That is what is happening in my country. We are saying, hey, look, women can enter that place of worship. That's it.
what about
We
in the
don't have,
case?
yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead, go ahead.
I've heard that during the '90s, like say Iran, that was quite westernized compared to how it is currently. It could be that I mean, there are instances where things have changed. Well, things were a certain way, and maybe we'd like to return to that certain way. But because of for certain reasons that we'll have to figure out, things have gotten more extreme. And I think a, a potential reasoning for that was this loss of meaning. Like the West has kind of fallen down a rabbit hole lo- of losing their kind of sense of purpose within the world. And when there's uh, when there's a vacuum of a certain value structure, it's going to emerge somewhere else where that vacuum can now take hold. And I think that's happened with Islam, because I mean it's the fastest growing religion uh, in the world right now. It's something where I don't think you can just wait for the people that have these beliefs die off. It seems to be something that, if it continues in the way it is currently, it will turn into a situation where we are in the minority, and if we can't learn to just discuss things on a base value, a base foundation of some sort of shared value system, then we're going to be eradicated. So that's a worry that can emerge, and I'd rather we do that thing instead of coming to blows and creating a large all-out war between nations, such as in the case of the not the Inquisition, the Crusades. There's definite reasons for the Christians to go about the Crusades, but I don't know if I would consider it exactly Christian-like what they were doing in those instances. And perhaps there could have been some other way of going about this. And I know it's naive because there are instances where people are not receptive to good news or some sort of something that you're trying to share with them. There's this movie by Martin Scorsese that was released a couple years ago. It's really, really good. It's called Silence, and it's about these Jesuit priests that are trying to share the gospel of Christianity within Japan. And because they do that, all of the Japanese people that come out as Christians are being tortured and killed and forced to apostatize, so give up their faith. And the same thing is happening to the priests. And so there's certain cases where by attempting such a thing, you're creating a much larger problem than was there previous to that. And there's sometimes things will work themselves out, but I think the faster way for that to happen is to find what it is that people are attempting to get and then show them how they can get it in a better way where it's not also harming them in the process. Because I think that's what most people do is when they're acting out these extremist things, that's them trying to attain something that they're missing, and it's harming them. And so if there's some sort of way that they can go about get what they're missing as well as not harm themselves, that would be something that ideally they'd flock to or that they'd rush to. But you have to put in the legwork first in figuring out what it is exactly that they'd be able to do that with.
Okay, perhaps I should have made that point that yes, obviously you can't wait for these people to die off, right? So uh, that makes an assumption that we have stopped the replication. Like the new people that are coming, right? We have kind of they no longer think like that. That's the only situation in which them dying off makes sense, because then it's only a matter of time. uh, how 10, 20, 30 years, that's nothing, man. uh, as long as they don't have new recruits, they are not replicating their ideology uh, in like one to one level. And that applies in my country because uh, in my country that has kind of been stopped. And the reason it has been stopped, John, is and you are talking about meaning earlier. Uh, so it's all about television, man. And these days, since we have the internet, then I might say it's about the that as well. And what I mean by that is, when I was growing up, right, I was seeing all these movies that are made by Bollywood. And I would say Bollywood is probably in India. You would find our space program, which is like doing great, uh, and which is really cool. And but that's like recently we have had all these victories in space. But before that, the one thing that's been there has been Bollywood, and that's the one thing that I can see that we have that other countries don't have. Obviously, Hollywood is there, but apart from that, there is nothing like Bollywood in this whole world. And I was talking to a colleague earlier, and he was saying, "Hey, the reason we don't hear this kind of news is the Americans are not worried about it." And I was like, "What?" Then he explained that they who owns all the media stuff, and I was like, "Yes, that has a American bent to it. Even people in Europe were saying that if something is happening in America, it's going to come here." To that narrative. So he was saying this narrative starts from America because American media is so powerful. But in Indian media is so powerful, John, that when I grew up, I was watching all these Bollywood movies, and it's you see, you have to understand something. This meaning thing, people don't understand it explicitly like you do. Because you have had all this education, self-education, John. You listen to Peterson, so you understand there is such a thing called meaning, this and that. But most people on this planet don't understand that. They might seek it, but they don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they kind of, I'm not sure if meaning, uh, they drive a lot of, let me put it this way, people already have inclinations towards stories.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, you may do that. Most people are not going to read books for those stories. The only minority of people will, very, very, very minority of people. Most of them would watch some kind of act, right? So and you get gripped by these things, John. Like, you just cannot move. You
Mm-hmm.
sit there for like 3 hours. We used to have very long movies in India, and uh, when I was growing up, they were talking about exactly the kind of things that were happening in the society. There were enough movies like that, and like imagine this, John. I'm 10 years old, and they are talking about the issues that are happening right now and issues that I will face when I will be like
Mm-hmm.
22 or 25. Like, they were talking about how people fall in love, and then in our society, the parents say, "Hey, you have this religion, and the other family has the other religion, so we will not let you get married." Or some people said, "Hey, it's wrong, love is wrong, this and that." So there was a lot of, if you go back to that era, John, like every other movie is like a kind of love story angle where people are not letting them get married. And what that did to, I think a lot of people was help them realize that you are a human being, I am a human being, and we are falling in love or something. So they kind of humanize the whole issue. Then what does it matter that if you are from a different caste community, or same caste, or whatever? And that had a lot of influence on us and our generation. Now there are a lot of youngsters who are still ignorant assholes in this country. There are enough of them, but that's not been trend in the media, John. I believe media in India has been like there are enough ignorant assholes in media also, but there have been enough people to have this kind of social vector. Okay, let me put it this way, John. Uh, how do you have a shared consciousness? This guy Peterson talks about how we all have this shared consciousness. He talked about in that interview he did with that European guy who explained five of his important points. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so how do we in India develop that shared consciousness, John? Uh, we do it because we watch the same kind of movies. Now, before the internet came, this applies more. After the internet came, the whole thing is so diverse that people perhaps don't, I mean, you can diversify your interest so much from the internet because there is so much out there, John, that uh, this whole thing has become very complex now. But before, uh, uh, and it's only recently we have had these high speed connections where we can watch these things, stream these things. So I would say even 8 years ago that was not the case, and then we had to mostly rely upon TV, and that's how we developed a shared consciousness, John, because we watch the same kind of movies. We are part of the same culture. We when we are talking to the friends, we make the same kind of jokes that we of the dialogues that we have learned from these movies that we watch. And the
Mhm.
moment you cannot communicate that to the Americans or anyone else, John, because uh, it's something that Indians will understand the moment you say it, and there is so much meaning behind it. So I believe that's uh, I believe that is the one thing that stops the next generation, John, from becoming these kind of radical assholes that their parents were, because those movies showed us very clearly that uh, whoa, man, whoa, there are problems, and it's not right. Uh, so what's the point? The point is we don't have that in these other countries, John, where all these things are happening, and I cannot believe it. I mean, uh, they have such a great degree of censorship about these things, but I do believe that there is perhaps a lot of youngsters in these countries. Uh, the interesting problem is, John, I believe that the replication ratio is very high in their community. As to you see all these terrorists who were second generation of these uh, these immigrants. It was the second generation who did all those acts, and you are like, fuck. I mean, and they use that as an example of, hey, those people were second generation. You can't say these people are bad. And you're like, no, man, you again got it backwards. Uh, if they were the second generation, that means they are still living among us and they are somehow able to replicate this shit. Uh, and I'm like, fuck, how can that be? But you would find in my country, that's just not happen. I mean, kids, uh, we have very tyrannical, I would say, had very tyrannical uh, idea of parents, that they have way too much influence on us. And I do know a lot of people who find themselves dealing with parents who with whom they just cannot share these values. But I also at the same time believe that we have had a lot of reforms because of the media. And I think in these Muslim countries, we do have a lot of people who are getting enlightened because they have the access to the internet, and they are consuming a lot of content about. So when you were saying that uh, some people will need to do some kind of self reflection, then you're exactly right. And I believe there are people, youngsters in these countries, who are doing that, John. uh, they don't think, uh, even though I don't have the numbers for you, and I don't doubt if anyone can. uh, but the issue is, for some reason in those societies, John, uh, this replication ratio is very high. In our cities, not. And and I do believe the power of media in that, John, a lot, because I know my country, so it is probably the single best thing that in my country had changed the minds of so many people about these things, especially the youngsters, because I'm very positive about their value system, even if I don't probably have anything uh, in common with most of them. It's just that as far as this issue of freedom are concerned, they are uh, they are very much serious about this. Enough of them. Let me put it this way: not all of them. Enough of them to stop anything from going back. You are saying Iran used to be very liberal. We have enough of people now who think this way to not have a situation where we would go back into the past. We will not. And uh, somehow we don't have that kind of penetration in these Muslim countries. And it's difficult for me to understand uh, how or why that is. But But I will not be surprised if there are young people there who are saying, "Hey, fuck, this is a problem. We need to change this." And in that context, the older people dying off makes a lot of sense. Assuming that you can have new people uh, whom that ideology will not be replicated. That's the whole thing. In my country that works. In these countries it does not work to that extent. So that's all. But the reason I brought up this media point is you were talking about meaning and everything, and I was like, that's a very kind of uh, intellectual thing, that most people perhaps may live it but don't understand it. But the thing about stories and media and movies, that just a universal thing, I believe.
Yeah. Just to bring up a point that was actually in the biblical lecture number 13, he talks about how he thinks that these archetypes that we have, they're things that are within our genes, that are kind of common to there's something that we can instantly almost recognize, and I think they're built into us through the common ancestry. I mean, you're always going to be growing up with a mother and a father, and then generally a brother or a sister. These are things that are going to be like ready for. It's like it's kind of like this blank canvas for these spots, and so once you grow up, these canvases are filled in with who you interact with and how you're raised in whatever society you have, or whoever you have as the individual raising you, or whatever. And if you're raised without that specific canvas being filled, then you're going to rush to get it filled somewhere else. Yeah, I have no solutions really, but I do agree with you. They're having a common media. It allows people to kind of understand each other better and understand problems a little bit better. And as the archetypes are fairly universal within the human species, then that's one common truth that people may unknowingly have within their own minds. And then you just have to kind of understand what is placed in those archetypes for different individuals. So in the case of Christianity, it's God as the father archetype. In Judaism, it's Yahweh. In Islam, it's Allah. It's all the same fatherly archetype, but there's being raised in a specific language and a specific location. There's going to be changes within that, but they're all sharing of some sort of archetype. And of course, just as in the case, it might be that there's a tyrannical father, but you have the necessity to hold him up as being only good. Then if in those cases, that'll put you in a position where you may disagree with what you're having to do, as in the case of communist Russia. But yeah, these are all just speculations as to problems that I see that could be coming up that are worth attempting to discover the the best way to go about solving them. But I actually have to go. We just have guests coming in, so.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So apologies for anyone listening that wanted to hear a discussion on the biblical lecture 13, but this is useful in its own right, probably.
All right, good. What is there? Good morning, John.
Oh, yeah.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. And if anyone would like to participate in the discussions that we have during the weekends, just go to jordanbpeterson.community, and all the links for the discussion pages, forums that we have, as well as the calendar for when these types of conversations occur, and all of that is there. And so next week we'll be discussing, hopefully, Lecture 14 in the psychological significance of the biblical stories lecture series. So
Okay. So I wanted to finish with this point about what you were saying about filling in the canvas. So that kind of makes a lot of sense because I still, to this very day, John, uh, can feel the power as if it is kind of imprinted upon my soul, like the power of a movie I saw when I was a kid about this young person who falls in love with the daughter of the dean of his college, who is very tyrannical. He's very like about discipline and everything, and he does not believe in love. He does not permit love, and he expels him from the college. And once you get expelled from that college, you don't get admission anywhere else. And his daughter then commits suicide, and uh, like 20 years later or something, he comes back to the college as a teacher, and he encourages people to okay, you have to go.
Yeah, sorry.
But I still remember that story. It is so powerful. You are right about that.
Yeah, it's something interesting you can see in your dreams too. Like I'll have dreams where in the dream I recognize that this person is the person that is my father. And so like I'll go about the dream in that instance. And then only after I'm outside the dream that I realize, oh, that's not the face of my actual father. That's just an actor's face that has kind of those patriarchal roles that they'll usually play, or has a kind of fatherly aspect about them. So it's interesting that you can recognize it. Anyway,
Right.
have a great day. See ya.
Same to you.